Is it joined with computer audio?
Should be.
Recording in progress.
Okay. My name is Natalie Thousand. Today is April 11th, 2024. The time here is 5:20 p.m. We are at the Pewaukee VFW post 9537 in Pewaukee, Wisconsin. I am interviewing Don Bykowski, who was born on May 6, 1968 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and served in Desert Shield and Desert Storm between 1987 to 1994. Don Bykowski was an E5 in the Navy and served as a cryptologic technician operator. This interview is sponsored by the Bell Tower Memorial. So first of all, thank you for letting me interview you. It's been a pleasure getting to know you.
My pleasure.
So to start off, what were you doing before you entered the service? Where were you going?
Before I entered the service, I was actually still in high school when I entered the service. I spent a year in delayed entrance, waiting to actually go into the military. During that time, I worked with the recruiting office, did different jobs on the weekends, but I was actually working for Lamplight Farms, putting together oil lamps on the assembly line, waiting. It was actually my job I was doing through the high school program.
Cool. Yeah.
So
was this like at school? Like, I mean, at our school, they have like the little table set up and there's like recruiting officers. Was that a similar situation, or how'd that work?
The recruiters had all come in. We had all 4 different recruiters that came in for all different branches of service, and they had come in and had conversations with all the different senior classes. And I had actually originally talked to the Air Force about joining the Air Force, and was planning on joining the Air Force until we got into discussions about job opportunities, and they wanted to make me a mess hall cook. And I didn't find it that entertaining, so I went back and talked to the Navy recruiter, who ended up giving me like 11 different choices of jobs. And out of the list, I kind of randomly looked through them and said, oh, this one sounds good. And that's how I ended up in the one I picked.
Yeah. I'm curious because, I mean, obviously you're a woman in the military. Was like the recruiting process more oriented towards men, or how did it look? Or was it open to everyone?
It was fairly open to everyone. I didn't really notice any singularization between the men and the women. But there were not a ton of women that were coming through the recruiting centers, taking their ASVAB tests and so on and so forth when I went through and did mine. And there were no females that I can recall out of my senior class that actually had talked to any of the recruiters for any of the branches at that point in time.
That's interesting. And then how did your family react when they heard you wanted to do this possibly?
My parents were rather excited. They were somewhat surprised, but I had talked to them beforehand. I had no money put aside to be able to go to college, and I wanted to travel, and the military kind of gave me that opportunity to learn a new skill, get educated later on in life, and to be able to travel.
Yeah, that's awesome. So where did you do your basic training now that you're transitioning? Where was it?
My basic training was in Orlando, Florida. It was the first time I'd ever gotten on an airplane.
Yeah, that was probably nerve-wracking.
It was terrifying.
Yeah.
Thank goodness there were some other recruits on there that had flown before, and they were gracious enough to get me comfortable enough with actually being on an airplane. So when the plane took off, we of course were in our seats, but later on they got me moving throughout the airplane to, sit by the window and move to the back of the plane, and everything was better that way. It wasn't quite as scary then.
Right, ease you into it. So, I mean, what was it like as a woman when you landed? I mean, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but go through that process again.
When we landed, we got onto a bus at the airport, and we drove from the airport to the base. We all got loaded into a big room, and any personal and private items, such as colognes, books, anything that you had taken with you on the plane that was not Navy regulation, got put into a big box, and they took care of it. It never got back to us. We then moved on to a room where we all got measured for hats and uniforms, and they gave us these index cards that we put in our mouth, and we walked with the index card in our mouth.
Really?
So that we could have our arms free to grab all of our uniform items as we went down the assembly line of collection.
Yeah. What were like uniforms like? Like, were they different from the men's uniforms and like with their hair? No, it was all the same.
Well, they were different for the dress uniforms, yes, because at that time, the ladies' uniform during the time that I was in was more, it was a lot dressier.
Yeah.
Today, the ladies are all wearing the Cracker Jacks that the men are wearing.
Yeah.
So we had different uniforms at that point in time.
Yeah.
But the dungarees were the same for everybody. We had the same pants. Basically, we had the big bell-bottom pants for both our dress uniforms and our regular working uniforms. So.
Yeah. And like, did you do your hair? Was it still the low bun? Did you do that, or?
We had to have that, but when I started in boot camp, we were not allowed to have long hair. Everybody that came through got their hair chopped.
Oh, really?
There was no pinning up your hair or anything else. That was something that would come as a like a benefit later on, that you earned that privilege to have your hair longer later on.
Yeah.
Boot camp, everybody was pretty much the same. We were all, the guys got in, got their heads shaved, the women got their hair cut. If you had glasses, you didn't get to wear your own glasses.
Really?
You had to wear the glasses that they issued, which were the most unattractive things you've ever seen in your life. And we, in our company, referred to them as birth control glasses because we figured none of the men were going to be interested in looking at any of us. And I think that was part of the Navy's plan. So.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What were like the living quarters like? What was?
In boot camp, we were in a big room, probably around the size of this room, with our bunks lined up down both sides of the walls. We all had, they were double bunks. We had our foot lockers at the end of the bunks, and the company commanders would come up and down through the middle aisle. They'd come in early in the morning with the trash can and toss it or bang it, make sure that we were all up at dark 30 to start our day. And then we went through whatever we had planned for that day. Sometimes it was training, sometimes it was PT, and actually we had PT every day. But we had, training classes that we had to go through.
Yeah.
They took us through, with boot camp, we actually went through fire training. So we got to go through, actually, on what the USS Blue Jacket is what it was called. We did our fire training. And we actually had to go through into a room, which was our gas chamber, and we all had to go in there with our masks on, and then they'd drop the gas and they had to take your mask off, and you had to sit in there for a period of time, and then they'd tell you to come back out. And after that, your eyes were watering and everybody was miserable, but we all went through it together because you had to know what it was like just in case it ever happened.
Yeah. Oh, that's terrifying. That's scary. What was the food like? Like, what was, and you mentioned the Fat Boy program. I want you to touch on that, but.
The food was average. It wasn't anything to write home about. I went into the Navy at 102 pounds, 103 pounds. And the Navy regulation was that you had to be at least 110 pounds or more. So they put me on what they referred to as the Fat Boy program. And they made me eat 2 meals at every sitting. So we had 5 minutes to eat a meal. Well, actually, it was considered chow, but we had 5 minutes to eat our chow. And in that time, everybody was eating through 1 plate. I was having to eat through 2. But by the time I left boot camp, I made it to 109 pounds. So they let me pass, even though I was a pound short, and I had to put that pound on before I made it to the next duty station.
Yeah. What was like the best or the worst part of training? I mean, I'm curious to see, like, did you make like your best friends there, or how did that, what was the best part?
I made some excellent friends in boot camp, some that I kept in touch with others that I did not. We kind of all lost track of each other. In fact, I'm still talking to one of the girls that I went to boot camp with.
That's awesome.
The worst part I think about boot camp is I knew in advance because my recruiters had talked about it, but they kind of told you it's a mind game. You've got to remember that they're going to play with your mind, and that was intentional. And as long as you could kind of put the two of them together and know that that's what was going to happen, it was easy enough to deal with.
Yeah.
But the worst part, I think, was we had one girl in our company that kept getting into trouble. And it wasn't because she was a troublemaker. I just think it was her personality kind of rubbed off wrong with people.
Mm-hmm.
So she'd end up down on what we called the company commander sidewalk, which was the sidewalk in between the two buildings, or in the middle of our building, because our building was U-shaped. And she would end up on the sidewalk exercising. And then she'd come back, and because she got punished, we would get punished.
Yeah.
So we would all end up in this little tiny room that was about the size of a closet, and we had 60 of us in there. And we were exercising for 2 to 3 hours at a time with the doors closed.
Oh my gosh.
And it was hot and miserable,
Yeah,
but
I can't even imagine. Yeah.
we got through it.
Right. And you're all together. Everyone had to do it.
Everybody had to do it. And the only other thing I had was I ended up sunburned.
Oh yeah. Tell me about that.
We had what we called our controlled liberty, which is we got to go out with the company together and go do something. And we decided we were going to paddle boat on the lake and just kind of play around at the lake on the base. And in that attempt, I didn't bother to put any sunblock on, or at least I put some on, but I didn't put enough on and didn't keep reapplying it. And by the time I got back to the barracks, I was a little red. I had fallen asleep in the sun for like an hour and got back. And after that, I woke up the next morning and I could not get out of my bed. I fell out of the rack, landed on the floor. My company commanders took one look at me and said, "You can't go anywhere. You're going to have to keep your mouth shut," and slid me underneath the racks. And I stayed there until they got back. They had brought me 2 boxes of chicken and a biscuit crackers. Oh my gosh. Because they're loaded with salt.
Yeah.
And I was to eat the boxes of crackers and drink lots of water just to rehydrate. And it avoided me being set back. Oh. Because normally you'd be set back.
Oh, really?
And I wouldn't have gotten to graduate with my company.
Really?
So I was able to graduate with my company, thankfully.
Yeah.
That was after being delayed. I waited 2 weeks for anybody to show up in order to get our company to begin with. So it would have really put me back even further.
Yeah.
So I was thankful for that.
Yeah. So how long was that period then that you were there?
10 weeks.
Wow, it's a long time.
So. Yeah.
So where were you sent after your 10 weeks of training?
I left Orlando and actually got to go home on leave for 15 days. And then I went to Pensacola, Florida, where I went to CTOA school and got to start learning about my job that I would be doing. Yeah. I was there, I want to say 8 weeks for training. It might have been 12. Yeah. Can't remember for sure. And then there we did PT every day. And of course we had school every day. And there was no sleeping. You got caught sleeping, you got in trouble. So we, as a class, and it was kind of the same thing in boot camp, we learned how to sleep with our eyes open. If you felt tired, you'd get up and you'd go stand in the back of the room, and people were physically sleeping with their eyes open in the back of the room. So nobody would know that you were sleeping. Because
how does that even work? How do you even do that?
It doesn't work for a long period of time, but it works for a short period of time. Yeah. And you get a little cat nap in. Yeah. I can't do it today, but then it was kind of cool.
Yeah. And then what was your main job or duty there? You said you had training, but what was that for?
That's where I went to school to become a cryptologic technicians operator, which is basically communications, telecommunications. That would be your ship-to-shore communications and your shore-to-shore communications. So we maintained the circuits that kept the communications open,
Mhm.
basically, is what it was. And that's
Yeah.
pretty much,
Yeah.
I can't tell much more
Right.
about my job.
Yeah. And then how long were you in Pensacola for?
I believe, I really think it was like 12 weeks
Oh, really?
that we were in school.
Yeah.
And then I left there
Mhm.
and went on to the next duty station, which
Yeah.
was my very first one, was actually at Fort Meade, Maryland,
Mhm.
which was an Army base.
Yeah. And were you doing the same job there?
I actually spent, because I had a clearance, a top secret SBI clearance, I ended up waiting. I was supposed to start right away, and because I was the only one that had a clearance to get into the National Security Agency to deliver mail from the commander into the National Security Agency, they kind of held me back from starting my job for a while.
Oh.
So I waited a month before I actually got to start my job.
Mm.
And then I went back and forth from the National Security Agency every day.
Mhm.
And I was doing my job there and stationed at Fort Meade, and which the National Security Agency kind of sits right on the outside of Fort Meade. So
Mhm. Yeah. And how long were you there for?
3.5 years.
Oh, wow. That's a long time.
So,
Yeah.
and while I was there, I wasn't going to re-enlist. I had actually talked to the detailer, and he had asked me where I wanted to go if I got stationed somewhere and decided to re-enlist. And I told him that, no disrespect, but I don't have any intention of re-enlisting, and the Navy's not going to send me where I want to go. The Navy's going to send me where they need me.
Mhm.
And he says, well, if they sent you where you really wanted to go, where would you go? So I gave him a list of places like the Azores and Rhoda, Spain, Hawaii, places that were warm.
Yeah, the warm places.
I didn't want to go anywhere cold. And decided finally, right before it was time, I decided in October of 91 to re-enlist, of 1990 to re-enlist.
Mhm.
And re-enlisted for another 4 years.
Mhm.
And got orders after Fort Meade to go back to Pensacola,
Oh.
which was very exciting.
Yeah.
We got to take a more detailed class on what my job was.
Mhm.
And from there, I spent, I think, another 8 to 12 weeks down there.
Mhm.
There was no room in the barracks at the time. It was unfortunate for me, not really. There was no room in the barracks, and we had a hotel right outside the base. So they stationed me inside the hotel. That was
so
my
nice.
barracks for the
That's great.
for the time I was there.
Yeah.
Didn't have to fix my bed. There were no room inspections. There was none of the stuff that I had to go through before.
Yeah.
And no roommate.
Yeah.
So it was fantastic.
Yeah.
Had a great time.
Yeah, warm water, room service. You
Exactly.
got it all. Yeah.
Well, they did not allow room service.
Oh, they did it?
No. I still had to keep my room clean, but
Yeah.
it wasn't inspected.
Yeah. That's a little weight off your shoulder there. And then where were you sent from Pensacola then?
From Pensacola, I went to Adak, Alaska.
The complete opposite of where you wanted to go, I'm sure.
Exactly.
Yep.
But again, it was where the Navy wanted me
Right.
and needed me rather than where I wanted to go.
Mhm. Yeah.
So it worked. I bit my tongue and went and spent 18 months there.
Yeah.
Food there, not so good.
Yeah.
We got a lot of grade D food
Mhm.
because a lot of the planes couldn't make it from Anchorage to Adak in time.
Mhm.
So there was always the worry that the food wasn't going to make it because the flights would get turned around and get sent back.
Yeah.
So they kind of sent us the lower grade foods.
Mhm.
I learned how to smell all my food.
Oh, goodness.
And I inspected all my food, and that continued on from then.
Yeah.
All the way through till probably 2 years after I got out of the military.
Oh, wow.
Because I didn't trust anything.
Yeah.
We had green ham. We had green eggs.
Oh my gosh.
It was just pretty gross.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because they were trying to disrespect us or not,
Mhm.
make sure we were fed properly. It was just food didn't make it to us on time all the time. So.
Mhm. And then this was described as an isolated tour. Explain to me what that is.
Correct. For the job that I was doing for the Navy at the time, we were not allowed on combatant vessels. Women were not allowed on combatant vessels. And so this counted as my sea duty because every male had to do 2 tours of sea duty and then they'd get 1 land tour. At least that was the way it was explained to me. So the same thing was happening with the females. And because I couldn't go to sea for the job that I was doing, they sent me on what they considered an isolated tour, which is a very remote place. Adak is very isolated. It's about 26 miles away from Russia.
That's crazy. So isolated meaning the location is isolated versus like you being isolated.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah.
Correct.
What did you do for fun when you were off duty? I mean, in Alaska, like there can't be much up there, but
actually there was a naval air station down in the other part of the island. So we were up in what we called the hills. We had down at the naval air station, they actually had a McDonald's and other things down there to entertain like the corpsmen and everybody that was down for the naval air station. And so I had some friends that were down there and I'd get to go down and visit them. But up in the barracks, if we get snowed in, I had no vehicle up there. There were a few people that had bought vehicles off of other people that were leaving. So we could borrow their cars every once in a while. But normally, everything was pretty much in the barracks. So we had a movie theater. Our movie theater was in the gym. They'd put up a big screen and we'd watch movies in the theater. We had a very small bowling alley. There was a club. And there was actually a little restaurant inside of there. It wasn't like a restaurant to go sit down, but it was like a carry-out only kind of place. So that we could order pizzas or different foods there, hang out in the club. So I would go bowling, or every once in a while I'd get to make it down to the other end of the island, but which was kind of fun. McDonald's was a special treat. At the time, I think I paid like $7.80 for a Big Mac.
Oh, wow.
That wasn't with the fries or the soda. So it was a special treat and you saved your money to be able to have that. But other than that, we just kept ourselves entertained, learned how to run. I mean, we had our PT stuff every year anyway, but you get to learn how to run inside the gym because it was sometimes too cold to be outside there.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So we're talking, I think it was 18 laps around the gym.
Oh, jeez.
So it got rather boring. So you put your headphones in and you just put music on, find a good song and run.
Right. Sounds exciting. And then from Alaska, where were you headed?
From Adak, Alaska, I went to Diego Garcia, another small island. This one was part of the Chagos Archipelagos chain, down by the Mauritius. So it was 80 degrees year-round. So I went from 30 degrees and carrying rocks in my parka pocket to keep me grounded to 80 degrees and sun shining and beaches everywhere.
Exactly what you wanted.
It was wonderful. I probably would have never left there. They might have made me leave there, but I wouldn't have left by choice.
And then I'm assuming you were doing the same job still there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then from like all these locations where you were at, how did you stay in contact with your family? What was that like?
In Adak, we actually they were able to call into the comm center. So we were able to get phone calls while we were on watch. Fort Meade was usually up through the barracks, but we were able to go and find a phone usually because we could get on and off base at Fort Meade. Fort Meade was pretty much open. I didn't do a whole lot actually on the base. When I was at Fort Meade, I spent a lot of time. There were malls and everything else because of where it was located in Maryland, so I could go to the mall, or I actually worked part-time jobs here and there. And so we had that to do. And my sister was actually down in Virginia at the time as a nanny, so I'd go visit her. But so I was able to make calls from outside of the base at Fort Meade.
Mm-hmm.
In boot camp, we had to use, there were 2 phones or 3 phones.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody was in a line, and it
Yeah.
was, you keep it short and
Yeah.
sweet, and yeah, I'm still alive. But you could send letters or cards, and I had same thing at Fort Meade. I was actually had my own phone, so I was sending, making calls that way.
Mm-hmm.
ADAC, I sent more letters, but I talked to my parents and through the comm center phones. And Fort Meade, Diego Garcia was pretty much the same way.
Mm-hmm.
That we would get calls into the comm center. We were able to give the number out, and then we could have them call. We'd kind of have to tell them ahead of time what the hours were. But there was also at the exchange, there were phones up there, and we used to kind of joke about the phones up there in Diego Garcia, because the calls, we referred to them as cable and heartless. It was cable and wireless, but it was cable and heartless because it was like $25 to call for 5 minutes.
Oh, that's terrible.
So nobody really called very often. It was too costly.
Yeah.
So, but I got to keep in touch with everybody.
Yeah,
that's all
good.
that mattered.
Yeah. And then was it after Diego Garcia when you decommissioned, or when did that?
I left Diego Garcia and went to Great Lakes to out-process from the military. I had we had some personal things going on in the family. My sister was ill, so I decided to leave the military. Otherwise, I probably would have stayed in.
Yeah.
But I went to Great Lakes and spent a month there out processing, and basically was on babysitting duty while I was there. Yeah. Just watching the girls that had gotten into trouble, that were soon to be headed to the brig, that needed to have somebody watching over them when they were using the facilities or what have you, to make sure nothing was going on that wasn't supposed to be.
Yeah. What would you consider your greatest contribution during your service?
That's a good question. I think that I was willing to mentor people. So the younger people that were coming in and the newer people that were always coming in, I was willing to work with them and teach them what I knew, so that they would in turn hopefully be able to teach somebody else.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Where did you go after your discharge? What was life like after that?
After I discharged, I came back home and actually got a job in a company called TCC Communications, and did their backups nightly to begin with. They kept everything that they did for their communications were all backed up. So I would take those and I'd do the backup, and then I'd take the tapes and deposit them in the bank safe. I also did accounting work for them, believe it or not, without any accounting experience.
Oh, really?
So.
Yeah. Is that where you're at now, or?
No, I've actually had several jobs since then.
Yeah.
I went to First Star Bank, which is now something else. I can't remember what bank it turned into now. And from there, I went to eFunds, and then, I went to OSI, which used to be Payco American, which was a collection agency, and they got bought out by OSI. And so I was doing networking and communication stuff there, dealing with all the computer terminals and things that had to be hooked up for all the collectors. And then I left there and went to eFunds and was still doing more network stuff. And in between there, went to WCTC and got a associate's degree from my GI Bill. So I finally got my schooling in and learned about the OSI reference model while I was in school, which is something most people don't know about, but it's kind of how traffic is delivered when you're in a communications field. So it starts with the network, and then you've got the software on the top.
Yeah.
And I actually decided that at that point in time that I wanted to learn more about the OSI reference model and the software side of things. So I went and applied for a job at AT&T and went to work for them and stayed there almost 7 years. and almost 8 years.
Mhm.
And because I was working a 100-hour week, I decided that it was time to move on. I was on call 365 days a year.
Oh gosh.
And so I left there right after I got married and am now with the vendor whose product I was working on at AT&T.
Oh really?
And I'm still, well, I'm not on that same product anymore. I've moved on to a different software product, but I support software products now.
Oh awesome. What was it like transitioning back to a typical lifestyle?
For me, it was fairly easy.
Mm-hmm.
I think I kind of kept that semblance of what a real life was like before. And having had that taste of it at Fort Meade, I knew that it was there. And, you know, working part-time outside of the military,
Yeah.
knowing what it was going to be like kind of once I got out, if I decided to get out.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that difficult. I know a
Mhm.
lot of other people have a lot of
Yeah.
difficulties, but for me, it was fairly easy.
Yeah.
I had my sister help me. She hooked me up with her friend, who's actually the one who helped me to get the job at TCC Communications when I first got out. So,
yeah. What were some life lessons you've learned that you've taken to your life now?
what life lessons? Discipline is important.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Honesty, trust, being truthful.
Yeah, I like that.
Discipline for me is still a big thing. My husband can attest to that. Other than that, I just keep trying to train people and teach people, and I think that's important.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure working with you. In closing, this has been an interview of Dawn Bykowski regarding her service in Desert Shield and Desert Storm. My name is Natalie Thousand. The time is 6 o'clock. Thank you for agreeing to this interview, and most importantly, thank you for your service.
Thank you.